This video is brought to you by Manscaped.com, the global brand for men's grooming and hygiene products. Manscaped by far has the best tools, liquid formulations, and just overall products for your body hygiene, and they package all of it for you in their new Performance Package 4.0 kit, which includes the all-new Lawnmower 4.0 body trimmer. I use this thing all the time. Before I was using the 3.0, but the 4.0 takes it to a different level. This 4th generation electric waterproof trimmer with advanced skin safe technology takes away all the anxiety and fears of trimming your body and groin hair. The nicks and cuts even in the most sensitive areas are not even a thought after you use the Lawnmower 4.0. I got hooked up with this, man, and it's actually unbelievable. You're able to use it in the shower. It has its own cordless charging system, which is very convenient, and the LED lights make sure you don't miss any area. It also comes with a new travel lock feature. If you just click the button 3 times, the lawnmower will not turn on. This is perfect when you're going out to travel. And the Performance 4.0 kit also comes with the Weed Whacker, which is for your nose and ear hair, the Ball Deodorant Crop Preserver, and the Ball Toner Crop Reviver. And for a limited time, you get all of this plus 2 free gifts, the Shed Travel Bag and the Manscaped Anti-Chafing Boxing Briefs. All you gotta do is go to manscaped.com today and get 20% off plus free international shipping with these 2 free gifts when you use the promo code WEASEL20. That's WEASLE20. Manscaped always uses the right tools for the job. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the MMA meeting. Let's Talk with Weasel podcast, where we talk all things MMA, and I hope you guys are having an awesome day. Let's get right into it. So, that Marvin Vettori versus Paulo Costa fight far exceeded expectations in terms of entertainment. It was more fun than I thought it was going to be. It was more explosive than I thought it was going to be. But Marvin Vettori didn't really wrestle as much as I expected. And honestly, on one hand, that is extremely impressive to be able to outstrike a bigger Paulo Costa, who he himself is not known to be that great of a striker. He's more known to just be a well-rounded fighter who excels in the grappling department. But the fact that he was able to implement his same game plan, his same approach on Paulo Costa that he did against everybody else, a lot of pullback left counters and some right hooks as set up for the left hand on the offensive, it just showed how much sharper he was as a fighter in there. But man, 205-pound Paulo Costa can kick. I've never seen him throw such heavy kicks like that. I don't know where those kicks were when he fought Israel Adesanya. I mean, he was drunk in the fight, but Marvin Vettori was able to deal with those very well, take a bunch of the kicks to the body, which is actually pretty surprising how much he was able to take. He took some flush shots to the head as well. I knew Marvin Vettori had an excellent chin, but I didn't know it was that good, man. This is legendary status of a chin. Marvin Vettori is a hard guy to crack. Adesanya couldn't do it. 205-pound Paulo Costa couldn't do it. And he's like walking through these guys' shots like they're nothing. Someone questioned as to why Marvin Vettori was not able to catch some of those kicks and take Costa to the ground, but there's a level of power, and I'm talking about force and speed, from Paulo Costa's kicks that have to be taken into consideration. When he hit Marvin Vettori, there was no catching those, man. And honestly, for Paulo Costa's career moving forward, I know he's going to be fighting at 205 most likely now. I want to see more of those kicks, man. I know he's been throwing them his entire career, but the level of power he's able to generate at the 205-pound division compared to how he was throwing them at 185 is a bit different. He was also very fast in that weight class. So Paulo Costa at 205 might actually be a bit of a problem. It's actually pretty exciting for that division. They need somebody like this guy. Like, imagine Paulo Costa versus Yuri Prohaska. Even him versus Jan Blachowicz would be crazy. Him versus Alexander Rakic or Magomed Ankalaev or even Dominic Reyes, Volkan Oezdemir. These are all great fights. And for those worried about his cardio, against Marvin Vettori, he showed he was able to go 5 rounds and even win the 5th round against Vettori in a fight where he was gassing out in the first. I don't know what happened. He got a second wind or something, but for the next 4 rounds, he was like picking up the pace. It was weird. He got tired early, fought a little bit tired, and then started picking up the pace after each round, to the point where he was able to win the 5th. So I wouldn't be really worried about his cardio at 205, man, because the more experience he gets fighting at that weight, the better his cardio is going to be. Now, there is an issue if one of those bigger guys take him to the ground, but then again, Paulo Costa's not small at 205. He's like, what, 6'1"? And he walks around maybe 230. I've heard even 240. I don't know which one is true, but he's definitely very heavy. I mean, if he's walking into the cage at 214 pounds when he's fighting at 185, he's for sure weighing over 220 walking around. 230 doesn't even sound that crazy when you know how much he walks into the cage at. I mean, let's compare that to Jan Blachowicz. Jan Blachowicz, when he steps on the scale at 205 pounds, he says when he walks into the cage, he's 220. He's 220 when he's in the cage. 6 pounds heavier than Paulo Costa when he has to make 185. I'm pretty sure Paulo Costa making 205, he's going to be weighing about the same, maybe even 220 as well. So when you really think about it, Paulo Costa is around the same size as these big light heavyweights. I don't know what kind of power Costa is going to be able to display in this division, because even at 185, he wasn't known to be like the heaviest puncher or heaviest kicker. At 205, he's kicking heavier, but I really wonder how much power he's going to have in this division against the other 205ers. Who knows? 205 pounds might be the division for Paulo Costa. It might be the weight class for him to compete at the best of his abilities. But that fight was about Marvin Vettori from even before they stepped into the cage. He didn't need to take it. He took it. He got more money out of it. They really need to up the penalty when someone misses weight to that extent, where they need to move the weight several times in order for the fight to be sanctioned. The fight was signed for 185 pounds. Costa couldn't make it, they bumped it up to 195. Costa still couldn't make it, and they bumped it up to 205. So technically, when you look at this, Paulo Costa missed weight by 20 pounds. According to the contractual weight, the weight that they signed on paper, he missed it by 20 pounds. In that kind of scenario, man, they gotta do like 50% up as a penalty. Marvin Vettori should be taking like 50 to 60 or even 70% of Paulo Costa's purse. He was making $100,000 to show, and I believe Vettori should have taken $50,000 at least out of Paulo Costa's purse, not just $30,000 that he took. So he should be walking out of that fight with $271,000. And now he's ranked number 2 in the middleweight division. He's ahead of the pack, where Jared Cannonier is going to be fighting Derek Brunson. The winner of that is most likely going to get a title shot. Vettori beat the number 5 Costa, who's probably going to leave the rankings. Vettori already beat Jack Hermanson. I mean, they could throw him Sean Strickland, or they could make Vettori wait out for the loser of Cannonier versus Brunson. Those two fights are like the only things that make any kind of sense. And in other news, the big thing going on right now is the whole thing around Nate Diaz. And if it's true, if the rumors are true, it's actually a very big deal regarding the whole pay landscape for the UFC fighters. So Nate Diaz has one fight left on his contract, and Dana is trying to do whatever he can in order to get Nate Diaz to sign another contract. He's trying to like play with Nate Diaz's pride in a way by saying that, you know, the top guys in the UFC. He's saying, I wonder how Nate Diaz can fight the top 5, and they're all in the UFC. He's trying to test Nate Diaz and get Nate Diaz to sign the contract in order to prove himself against the top guys in the division, which also means if Nate does sign the contract, he's going to fight another top 5 opponent. And the only way Nate Diaz is going to sign any contract is if the money is right. I'm pretty sure he still wants to compete in the UFC. If the numbers aren't right, he's going to go somewhere else, man. He might go to boxing, and that's where all the rumors are. The rumors that are spreading around is that Nate Diaz is already looking to step into boxing right now. And I don't know who started those rumors. I heard it came from Josh Thompson, and I doubt Nate Diaz would ever tell Josh Thompson that. And then comes Chael Sonnen saying that he talked to Nate, and Nate told him that he's looking to go into boxing and piecing one-on-one together, box with Jake Paul. I like Chael. I don't want to challenge greatness, but he does lie about these things. He's lied about these stories in the past. Remember the whole thing about Dominic Cruz? He said Dominic Cruz texted me and he said he wanted to fight Sean O'Malley. And then Dominic Cruz comes out saying, I never even texted him that. What is he talking about? So I don't know how much I would trust Chael Sonnen on this story rather than him just trying to create some buzz and stuff. There's a bit of logic behind it, but what it all comes down to is the money. And I believe Dana is going to do whatever he can to keep Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz is a big star in the sport. He draws numbers. Dana is not going to let a guy like that go so easily. Of course, he's going to compensate him. But I wonder if it's what Nate wants, because the Diaz brothers have historically been known to be hard to negotiate with, to be hard to work with in business. And what I'm glad about, Nate Diaz has the leverage. He finally has the leverage. After everything he's gone through his entire UFC career, from being labeled as a non-needle mover, said to be stuck in Nick Diaz's shadow, not that great of a fighter, and all of that stuff. He's proven the doubters wrong. He's proven the brass wrong about him. And he finally has the leverage. This is what we want to see. He has so many options. He has so many things he can go to. Even if the UFC doesn't match the numbers that he wants, he could step right into boxing and make millions off an easy fight with Jake Paul. That's an obvious fight he can take and just make a bunch of money and treat it like a sparring match. Jake Paul has no chance against Nate Diaz. He can go and fight higher level boxers the way Anderson Silva did. He would love to test himself in boxing against a real boxer. He could just step into business and not fight ever again. The guy is set for life. He has more time to open up schools and stuff. Like, Nate Diaz has so many options and he's not hurting at all. This is a success story for a fighter, and I'm so glad to see it. But with that, let's go right into the questions. We're going to start 5 questions for the members, 5 questions for the patrons, and then we're going to go right into a bunch of the public questions. First one by Fight IQ. What's the better theoretical advantage? Fast reaction time or fast hand speed, foot speed? It's definitely fast reaction time. Time in general is going to exceed any kind of speed, as long as the accuracy is on point. And honestly, what Conor McGregor said about the Jose Aldo fight, when he said timing beats speed, that is real. You don't have to be faster in order to get to the destination first. If you're able to gauge your path to get to that destination through timing, that's ultimately going to be the better way to get to the destination. In this case, landing a strike on the opponent. Because fast hand speed and foot speed isn't as complex as fast reaction timing is, because for the most part, speed is largely relied on a biological factor. Some guys are just going to be faster than others, and there's nothing you can really do about it at times. Yes, you can make yourself faster through training and stuff, but it's never going to be a drastic change. You are born a certain way with certain types of muscle fibers. The techniques you learn and stuff is going to be able to increase your speed just a little bit, but it's not going to be a drastic increase. Guys like Marvin Vettori are never going to be faster than Robert Whittaker. Nate Diaz is never going to be faster than Wonderboy Thompson. Conor McGregor is never going to be faster than Jose Aldo. But timing is something that you can absolutely train and get increasingly better at through training. Yes, some of it is biological, such as hand-eye coordination. Certain athletic ability is going to help you with faster reaction time. The way you're able to see things and stuff like that, yes, that is going to have some sort of biological factor in terms of you having faster reaction timing. But you could train at this far more than you can for sheer body mechanical speed. And because of that, there's more of a ceiling that everybody can get in terms of fast reaction timing. And again, it is more complex. In order to get better timing, you're also going to have to be more technical in certain instances. To be fast, you don't need to be technical necessarily. You don't really need to exhibit any kind of great amount of skill in order to be fast. But for timing, you do in a sense. You need to know what your opponent is doing. You need to know how to counter. You need to know how to move. You need to know certain things in order to react correctly. So yes, reaction timing is better than hand speed and foot speed. And then we go to Nick Beadle. Do you think if judges start scoring rounds using all the points, where we see more varied scores like 10-6s or even 8-5s, would referees be more apt to immediately take points for fouls? I feel like there's a pressure not to take a point when it could literally decide the fight. Currently, 1 point is a big deal, and I agree with that, man. We just saw that with the Paulo Costa fight. Paulo Costa got 1 point deducted. Now, it didn't really change the scoring that much because Vettori would have still won, but it might play a factor. I mean, these referees are human. If we use more points in scoring, the only thing I don't like about it is that a point deduction wouldn't even take much out of the fight. That's the only thing. Yes, it would take some of the pressure off of the referees to take a point away if an eye poke happens or a low blow happens, but it wouldn't impact the scoring too much. That's the only thing. So in a way, if you just scale it to how it is today, it really wouldn't make much of a difference, because I think at that point, if they were to use all the points in scoring, they would need to also scale up the amount of points they take away for certain fouls. And that can actually be pretty interesting now that I think about it. Like, there will be no more warnings, right? Let's say no more warnings if we're using all the points. You eye poke someone, that's a 1 point deduction. Another eye poke can be magnified on that. And it can even come down to intention or how bad the damage is. The more damage the eye poke causes, the more points that's going to be taken away. If it's like an accidental thing that didn't really hurt the opponent too bad, but it did take them a bit of time, let's say like 30 seconds to get back into the fight, that's a point deduction, right? And that 1 point deduction won't be too impactful on the scoring. But the worse it gets, the more you can scale on the point deductions, whereas right now it's a bit limited. Right now it just seems like a warning, 1 point deduction, or disqualification. That's what it seems like right now. There's not many options for referees to go to, and that can also put more pressure on the refs to do what they think they need to do. And then we go to Kakashi of New Jersey. Hey Weasel, Usman has had a dominant run through the welterweight division. Does this put him near GSP for pound welterweight GOAT? If not, what does he have to do? Love the content, man. Thank you so much. No, he's not too close in my opinion. I believe he's the second greatest welterweight of all time. He is exchangeable with Matt Hughes, I believe. But number 2 to number 1, that is GSP, there's a really big gap. What GSP did in this welterweight division is starting to be forgotten a bit. A lot of people want to throw the current champs up ahead of the guys who have all the records, but we cannot forget what the legends did in the past. GSP is far ahead of Kamaru Usman. Let's go through it really quickly. How many title defenses does Kamaru Usman have? He has 4 title defenses. GSP had 9, over double. How many title wins does Kamaru Usman has? He has 5. GSP has 12 welterweight title wins. over doubling what Kamaru Usman was able to accomplish so far. Now let's look at the win streak. Kamaru Usman has been undefeated for 8 years. Since December of 2013, he has not lost a fight, and that consists of an 18 win streak. For GSP, he was undefeated for 6 years, and that consists of 12 wins. That is one thing that Kamaru Usman does rank ahead of GSP. But the most important thing to look at if you want to say who is the greatest of all time, it's the competition. Who did they beat? How many great fighters have they beaten? And how great were those fighters? And how often did this happen? There's no debating that both of these guys have defeated a tremendous level of competition. Well, Kamaru Usman did beat Leon Edwards early on. He did beat Sean Strickland. He beat Damian Maia, Rafa dos Anjos, Tyron Woodley, Colby Covington, Jorge Masvidal twice, and Gilbert Burns. If we categorize in terms of who's a great fighter versus a good fighter, we'll say that Leon Edwards back in that day, I wouldn't say was a great fighter. He beat Leon Edwards very early on in his career. Now, Usman was also pretty young in his career too, so we'll count that as a good win. Sean Strickland's a good win. Damian Maia, I will say, is also a good win. He was on the decline when he fought Usman. Rafa dos Anjos, welterweight, I would say is also a good fighter. Tyron Woodley's a great fighter. Colby Covington, great fighter. Jorge Masvidal, I would probably say a great fighter. And Gilbert Burns, definitely a great fighter. So 5 great wins and 4 good wins, arguable with Damian Maia and maybe Rafa dos Anjos if you want to bump them up. And then we look at Georges St. Pierre. GSP beat Carl Parisian back in the day, who I will say is a good fighter. He beat Mayhem Miller, I will say another good fighter. An undersized Sean Shirk, I'll say he was a good fighter. BJ Penn twice, great wins. Matt Hughes twice, legendary, great wins. Josh Koscheck, I'll say a good win, but he is arguable. Some people would put him back in the day as a great win. Matt Serra, good win. Prime John Fitch, I would probably say great win. He was on a massive streak back in the day. Thiago Alves, good win. Josh Koscheck the second time, I will say another good win. He was better when he fought GSP at that time, so another arguable great win, but I'll put him at the good win. Jake Shields, great win, 100%. Carlos Condit, great win. Nick Diaz, great win. Johnny Hendricks, great win for the circumstances. There seems to be a little bit of recency bias for Kamaru Usman, but when you look back at the era that GSP fought in and the amount of guys he beat and different generations of fighters that he went up against and how many consistent good and great fighters that he beat, GSP is definitely ahead of Kamaru Usman, and honestly, it's not that close. What does Usman have to do though? Man, let's say he fights Edwards afterward. He beats him. He beats Vicente Luque. We'll say Wonderboy gets a crack at him, beats him as well. I don't know who else would be up there. He beat almost everybody else. Maybe a Khamzat Chimaev, let's say he jumps up the ranks, fights Gilbert Burns a second time, beats him as well. If he's able to do that, get like 4 or 5 of those great wins together, he would probably surpass GSP. But that's a very tough task. That's extremely tough. Because not only would he rival the title defenses, he'll also be superior in the competition level. And then with Diego Stork, does Volkanovski versus Holloway 3 determine the featherweight GOAT, or does Aldo still got them beat? They're not close to Aldo. I've been saying this for so long when the whole Holloway GOAT train was going on, and I'm glad everybody saw through that. Neither of those guys are close to Aldo. If you think Usman is far from GSP, Holloway and Volkanovski are even farther from Aldo than Usman is from GSP. They have not done near enough in terms of accolades, achievements, championship wins, and all that stuff to be compared to Jose Aldo. I understand Jose Aldo got the championship right away, but you also have to include the WEC days. That was practically the UFC. It was the same fighters, the same division, same champ. They just moved it into a different organization. That's all. If you could have any fighter come back to the sport in their prime, who would it be and why? I would love to say Fedor Emelianenko, but obviously the big one is GSP. If GSP can go back in his prime and fight guys like Usman, try his hand at Israel Adesanya, because I do believe he would have a very good style to at least contest Adesanya. Even go up against some of the lightweight champions, let's say at a catch weight or something, or even at 170. That would be great as well. Colby Covington fight would be awesome. There's so many great fights for GSP right now. It is kind of bittersweet that he's gone, man. And then with the 2K_Jai, early prediction for Geoff Neal versus Ponzi. I'm scared for Santiago Ponzinibbio, man. He's not the same guy. We have to get that out of the way. He is not the same guy. He's older. The infections and injuries he went through that took him out for 2 to 3 years destroyed him. It just did. It just destroyed him. He's never been the same since. For those who don't know, he's gotten so many, was it bone or blood infection? It was something very serious to that magnitude. He had a bone or blood infection or something at one point. I believe he had staph infection really bad. He was going through a whole bunch of stuff and he almost died. Literally almost died. And that was right after the Neal Magny fight. The prime performance of his career, the master class that deemed him as one of the brightest contenders in the welterweight division at the time. And for those who don't remember, he was supposed to fight Kamaru Usman, and that's what pulled him out. And back in that day, Ponzinibbio had the style against that version of Kamaru Usman to absolutely beat him. But after so many years off and just getting older in the game and taking a horrendous damage against Li Jingliang and even against Miguel Baeza, I don't know how he's going to deal with another legit contender like Geoff Neal who hits as hard as he does. And another thing is Geoff Neal has crazy power. I understand nobody Geoff Neal has fought hits like Ponzinibbio. Now, Nico Price can compare to the power that Ponzinibbio is able to deliver, but when you talk about the speed of his punches and the precision of his punches, nobody really punches the way Ponzinibbio does that Geoff Neal has ever fought. But I do think that Neal's chin is so solid, he will take a tremendous amount of punishment. It all honestly goes down to if Geoff Neal is aggressive. If he's not aggressive like the way he fought Wonderboy Thompson, he might get picked apart from a distance off of that jab. Ponzinibbio has one of the most underrated jabs in UFC history. It's extremely fast, it's hard to see coming, he sets things off of it, and he takes off angles with it. He's able to put a jab on guys like Neil Magny and stuff, who they themselves have good jabs and are much longer than he is, and he's able to find his way in there and just pop him in the face with them, and he's able to knock people out with a jab. He knocked out Gunnar Nelson with a jab. But when you throw in that Ponzi's chin is not the same, and he's older, I do have to go with Geoff Neal, and I'm going to go by a knockout. It might be somewhat similar to the way Li Jingliang knocked him out. And we go to the first Patreon question by Kinu17. Hey Weasel, I've been wondering about something. You said that it's really hard to fight Barboza without pressuring him. So how do you see a fight between patient, non-pressuring Gaethje versus prime Barboza? Barboza tears him apart. It's very difficult to fight Barboza from a distance without pressuring him. Anthony Pettis learned the hard way. And Anthony Pettis back then was thought to be one of the best distance strikers in the entire UFC. And he got beat by Barboza. It will take someone like a Giga Shikadze, who's longer than Barboza, more experienced in kickboxing, younger, faster. It will take someone like that, who has the physical advantages over him, to be able to beat him in that kind of game. But I don't think Gaethje would be able to do it. Gaethje is way too hittable from a distance, especially for a guy like Barboza. Barboza's very good at checking leg kicks. He's so much faster. He's so much sharper from a distance. He's so much more accurate. And you allow Barboza to kick. When Gaethje pressured him, he wasn't allowing Barboza to throw what makes Barboza Barboza, those body and leg kicks. So I definitely see Barboza winning. I can honestly see him winning through a body shot. And then we go to Felipe Valencia. Theoretically speaking, what would be the Weasel's nightmare matchup between Prime Tony, Max Holloway, Colby Covington? I always say for the way I fight that Colby Covington would be by far the most difficult matchup. I do not like wrestlers, man, and I just don't have the wrestling cardio. That style is just suffocating, man. And then go to Eric Perez. Who wins, Team Featherweight or Team Lightweight? This is interesting. So Featherweight champ versus Lightweight champ, and then we'll go through all the contenders. And honestly, if we're going to do a question like this, Featherweight and Lightweight might be the best divisions to compare, because the Featherweights are so big for the division, scaling to the other fighters. Like the Bantamweight guys are not as big in their division as the Featherweights are in theirs. And this goes for almost all of them. Look how big some of these Featherweights are, like Max Holloway, Brian Ortega, Kelvin Cater is huge, Shane Burgos, Edson Barboza, Giga Shikadze. I mean, these guys are all like 6 feet tall, and they're long, and some of them get pretty full. And then you got Zabit coming back. I mean, it's just crazy. So, who wins, Charles Oliveira or Alexander Volkanovski? Honestly, guys, I gotta go Volkanovski. I don't think he gets taken to the ground. I think he's more powerful than Charles Oliveira. I think he can match the speed for sure at 155 pounds. He's one of the better guys at making his way into distance. And as we all know, Oliveira does not move his head when opponents darting on him. So some of those entry 1-2s and even jab overhand rights and stuff like that, and even some of the leg kicks are going to be great for Volkanovski to get inside Charles Oliveira's face. Not a lot of guys in the lightweight division are able to get into the distance like that the way Volkanovski can. And that is where Oliveira is going to really struggle. Also, Oliveira doesn't have the greatest chin. He has good heart that he's been showing, but man, he gets dropped pretty easily sometimes. Now, Dustin Poirier versus Max Holloway, we already kind of saw it. Brian Ortega versus Justin Gaethje. Gaethje destroys Brian Ortega. That would not be a fun one to watch if you're an Ortega fan. His defense is not up to par, and if you're going to get hit by a guy like Gaethje without having much of a defense, they're going to need to call an ambulance in advance. Beneil Dariush versus Yair Rodriguez. Definitely go with Beneil Dariush through the wrestling and the size. He might be able to do something similar to what Frankie Edgar did to Yair, but with a bigger body. Chan Sung Jung versus Michael Chandler. This one is honestly a fun one, because I don't think Chandler wants to go to the ground with Korean Zombie too early. Korean Zombie also, I believe, can display better cardio. He has one-shot knockout power. Chandler does not have a good chin. Also, the main thing here is the counter-punching of Korean Zombie is absurd. And Michael Chandler is so simple with the way he throws punches, and his approach is just generally straightforward. I definitely see Michael Chandler getting countered and knocked out. I can see Michael Chandler like digging in with the right hand to the body or something like that, and Korean Zombie able to sidestep it very slightly, the way he always goes by these subtle movements, and just cranking an uppercut on him. One issue for Korean Zombie might be the leg kicks though. Chandler might be slamming those leg kicks on him, but even there, There's a big opportunity for Korean Zombie to land right hands over the top. Islam Makhachev versus Kelvin Kattar. Like, there couldn't be more of a perfect matchup for Islam Makhachev. I mean, wrestling clinic, and it won't even be difficult at all for Islam. Dan Hooker versus Arnold Allen. That's honestly a very good fight. I would love to actually see this one. I would say Arnold Allen is definitely the more well-rounded fighter. He's going to attempt to wrestle Dan Hooker a lot, maybe scrap his way in there a little bit. Dan Hooker seems to be a little bit more technically offensive. But the thing with Arnold Allen is I could definitely see him getting caught in the clinch and in close range by some of the elbows and knees from Dan Hooker. Because of some of the sloppiness from Arnold Allen, it leaves a lot more opportunity for Dan Hooker to counter him or just to outright pressure him and find his openings as well. So I'm going to have to go with Hooker. Definitely if the fight is 5 rounds too. Tony Ferguson versus Josh Emmett. That's such a sad one. I got to go with Josh Emmett. He's so much faster. He's very powerful. He might even hit harder than Tony does. And Tony's just not the same guy. I mean, if this is prime Tony, Emmett gets torn to pieces out there. But now that Tony's like shying away from exchanges and just doesn't want to deal with any damage at all, he's not going to deal well with Josh Emmett. Rafael dos Anjos versus Giga Chikadze. That's actually a pretty good fight due to RDA's well-roundedness and specifically his wrestling and top control. He's also far better for a 5-round fight, whereas I've seen Giga Chikadze kind of gas out a little bit or get tired as the fight does go into the 3rd round. Giga is definitely going to be the far better striker in almost everything he does. It's a difficult one, but man, I'm probably going to have to go with RDA. I think the wrestling might be a little bit too much. Giga hasn't shown the greatest takedown defense so far, and he hasn't really fought that many wrestlers or guys who even have good takedowns. Early on, he got taken down a bunch in his UFC career, but lately they've been matching up with more strikers. His performances might be a bit inflated when you take into factor the styles that he's fighting. Then number 9, Conor McGregor versus Dan Ige. Definitely have to go with Conor McGregor. Number 10, Gregor Gillespie versus Edson Barboza. Gotta go with Gregor Gillespie. That pressure's too much. The wrestling's too much. If Gillespie starts to strike with Barboza, he's gonna get knocked out. Pretty much comes down to the fight IQ. Diego Ferreira versus Bryce Mitchell. Ferreira has a lot of power. He's underrated as a technician, and he does have better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu than Bryce Mitchell. Mitchell is advancing in his striking more. I'd be surprised if he's able to submit someone like Ferreira, so I'm gonna go with Diego Ferreira on that one. He's also much bigger. Brad Riddell versus Sadiq Youssef. Definitely have to go with Brad Riddell. Armin Saryukian versus Movsar Evloev. I'm going to have to go with Armin Saryukian for sure. Rafael Fiziev versus Shane Burgos. That would be a wild fight. I would love to see this. I honestly think it is a pretty close one, but I'm going to slightly lean to Fiziev's side because of how defenseless Shane Burgos can be. And Thiago Moises versus Alex Caceres. I'm going to lean to Thiago Moises, but that's a competitive fight. And then with a Jesse Griffin. Heavyweight tournament, all fighters in the primes, who wins in each bracket and then wins in the finals. Bracket 1, DC versus Fedor. Interesting pick right there. Lesnar versus Ngannou. And then bracket 2, Kane versus John Jones. And Stipe versus Ciryl Gane. So this is all in their prime. So I'm going to go with Fedor beating Daniel Cormier, although it's a very close fight. I think he can neutralize the wrestling. I think he's much better on the ground as well. He's more powerful than DC on the feet. They're both not exceptional technical strikers. And Fedor probably hasn't beaten both speed and power. DC will mix up the game a lot more. He would use his wrestling in order to find his strikes over the top, but he generally likes to get in close on his opponent, almost into clinch range. He does not really want to get into clinch with Fedor, man. I know his high crotch is scary, but he will probably get thrown by Fedor. Fedor is just so fast in everything he did back then, and he had an iron chin too. I gotta go with Fedor. I think Ngannou destroys Brock Lesnar. First uppercut and it's over. I think John Jones beats Cain Velasquez 100%. I don't even think it'll be that difficult for John Jones, to be honest. I think Stipe beats Ciryl Gane, but man, it's really hard to say because I don't know how good Gane's takedown defense is, so I'll just go to Stipe. With that, we got Fedor versus Ngannou. I think Ngannou knocks him out. And then we got John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. And in that, I'm going to go with John Jones, but that is an extremely close fight. And that leads right into Ngannou versus John Jones, and I think Ngannou knocks him out. And then the last question for the patrons. Manny Boom, how far away do you think TJ is from being the GOAT of the bantamweights? I don't think he can be the GOAT because he took PEDs, but if you are taking that away and we're just looking at how his career has gone, he's not that far, I guess. I mean, if he wins the belt again, I think he would establish himself as the greatest bantamweight of all time. He would have the most accomplishments, and it probably has been the most stellar competition. But personally, I cannot put him as a GOAT, ever. And then if Poirier beats Oliveira, is there an argument for him being greater than Khabib? He has beat Eddie, Justin, Conor twice, Holloway twice, and Hooker. Also, can you start to do more extra podcasts, please? Yeah, man, I'm sorry about that. I've been just so busy. But if Poirier beats Oliveira, is he greater than Khabib? What I will say is Dustin already, right now, has beaten better competition than Khabib has. He doesn't have the title records. He doesn't have the title wins. He doesn't have the title defenses. He has multiple losses on his record. He wasn't as dominant even with some of those wins. I'm going to say no. He won't be greater than Khabib because of how much of an anomaly Khabib was. But if he defends his belt twice, even not being dominant, I'd put him ahead of Khabib. And with that, we go right into the public questions. The first one by Jerry Jordan. Hey Weasel, big fan. Gastelum recently said that he's going to hire a dietitian and see about going down to 170. How well do you think Gastelum could do against Usman? Better late than never, I guess. But I do not think he does that well against Usman, to be honest. He's taken so much damage at middleweight, I wouldn't be shocked if Usman drops him. Gastelum is not going to thwart the wrestling at all. I think he's going to get taken to the ground. I think he might get dominated on top. And that right hand from the orthodox Usman against the southpaw Gastelum is going to have a natural opening. I think Gastelum will get caught many times from that long reach and from the condition from the wrestling. Then with the bro Kunkel. Is Marvin Vettori's chin potentially considered a legendary one? The shots he can take, not just to the head, but to his whole body are astonishing. Where would you rank his chin amongst the all-time greats? Love your work and channel. Keep up the great work, man. Thank you so much. So it's not just his chin, it's just his entire durability. Now, it's hard to really put him up there with the guys like Prime Dan Henderson and Mark Hunt and Francis Ngannou and Prime Diego Sanchez and Max Holloway and stuff. Like, it's really hard to put him up there right now because he hasn't gotten hit by too many hard hitters, you know? Adesanya definitely hits very hard. He was able to take Paulo Costa's kicks at 205 pounds while being undersized. So those are a big deal. But the rest of the guys he got hit by weren't really devastating hitters. I mean, Carl Robertson hits hard, but I don't really remember him catching Vettori at all. I think he just got taken to the ground very early and submitted. He got hit a few times by Kevin Holland, who does hit pretty hard as well. I got to give credit to that. Cesar Ferreira hits hard as well. So yeah, actually, there are some guys that definitely hit hard. And he's never really been staggered like that, you know? It's crazy the amount of damage in such a little amount of fights and able to display how great his chin is. And he is in a heavier division, so that is another thing as well. Middleweights hit harder than the welterweights and lightweights. And I understand the middleweights do have better chin, but it's not like drastically better. The power chin gap, the higher the weight classes go, is far bigger than it is for the lower weight classes. I've talked about this before, like a lightweight can knock out a heavyweight with a really good blow. So I will say, right now, Marvin Vettori has one of the best chins in the UFC currently. I would say like him, Max Holloway, Vicente Luque, Francis Ngannou are the top of the list right now in the UFC in terms of having a great chin. And then we go to Zan Warren Kaiser. If Chimaev beats Jing Liang, how do you see his path to the top playing out? Do you think he has the skills to beat Usman, Colby, or Adesanya Whitaker in a couple of years? Keep up the amazing content. Thank you so much, man. It really depends on how he beats Jing Liang because that's the big thing going into this fight. That's the craving thing about this fight. He's actually fighting a contender, and not only a contender in Jing Liang, but a contender that is rising. Jing Liang might be on the lower end of the top 15, but he's making his way up the ranks right now. He's in his prime. He's as dangerous as he's ever going to be. It really depends how Chimaev beats him. If he struggles with Jing Liang, I do not see him doing that well against Usman and Colby and Adesanya and Whitaker. If he outright just demolishes or dominates Jing Liang, makes it look like he doesn't even belong in there with him and takes him down without even any kind of difficulty, honestly, it's still early to say how he competes up against the top guys. But with analysis and a little bit of a guess, I would say he would be a threat. His style is dangerous for a guy like Adesanya. Is potentially dangerous for Colby and Usman as well because he can neutralize the wrestling and he has punching power and he's big. And honestly, that different style of wrestling may confuse Usman and Colby Covington, and Colby has been taken up by RDA. So it really depends. I don't see him ever being Whitaker though. Whitaker is an anti-wrestler. You do not throw wrestlers at Whitaker and expect them to win. And then we go to Zach LaPapalo. From a purely stylistic perspective, what is currently the most exciting matchup in each division? Oh, that's a difficult question. Honestly, in the heavyweight division, it is what's going on right now. Francis Ngannou versus Ciryl Gane, in my opinion, is the most interesting stylistic collision because you do have the technical fighter in Ciryl Gane that's very rare for the heavyweights versus the usual style the heavyweights fight with that rely on pure power and chin and just physical attributes in Francis Ngannou. It's almost like what is better, the skill base or the physical attribute base? Now, for light heavyweight, you could see this in a number of ways. I really like Magomed Ankalaev versus someone like Alexander Rakic. I love that fight because it's two guys who are a bit patient. They like to counter and like to wait back a bit and kick a lot. So the similar styles that those two have can make it for a great chess match. But Yuri Prochazka versus Jan Blachowicz in a way is so enticing because they're opposites. Jan Blachowicz is a lot more fundamental. He's a lot more order, whereas your Prochazka is more chaotic. You don't know what he's going to do. You kind of know what Jan Blachowicz is going to do, but you have no idea what Yuri's going to do. It's a contrast of disciplines in a way, or should I say the way they operate in a fight. For the middleweight division, I would love to see Israel Adesanya versus someone like Andre Muniz. Because Andre Muniz has good takedowns. He's an exceptional grappler, one of the best grapplers in the sport right now. He's also a very big middleweight that can really contest Israel Adesanya, and that's mostly due to, I want to see Adesanya get tested in different areas in the middleweight division, not the light heavyweight division like when he fought Jan Blachowicz. Vettori did try to take him to the ground, but Andre Muniz is a little bit different. He's more athletic and stuff like that. It would just be a better fight in my opinion, but if you're looking at a high level fight, Adesanya versus Whitaker is the best you're going to get. The welterweight division is very strange because it seems like everybody fought each other. Like when I think about who can fight Stephen Thompson, he's already fought almost everybody. Kamaru Usman has fought almost everybody. Burns is fighting everybody too. But in terms of a stylistic perspective, I do like Colby versus Usman. I mean, the fact that they cancel each other's wrestling out, or they can see who is the better wrestler in the fight. They are two of the highest caliber wrestlers in the entire division. That is always going to be an interesting style matchup. The one that I had before was Gilbert Burns versus Usman, because I wonder how the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu of Burns can impact the fight as well as his power and speed. But we did see how the fight played out. We did see Wonderboy versus Vicente Luque, which was another one. Just a contrast of styles in terms of how they approach a fight. The movement dynamic of that fight was the main enticing thing about it. I'd probably say Usman and Colby, or Gilbert Burns and Usman is still like the most enticing fight, or even Gilbert Burns versus Colby Covington. Then for the lightweight division, there's so many good ones. Islam Makhachev versus Justin Gaethje would be amazing to watch. Could it play out the same way when Gaethje fought Khabib? Who knows? Dustin Poirier versus Charles Oliveira is a magnificent fight stylistically as well. They're very different. It's a battle between pressure and range. I also do like Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira. That would be an excellent grappling stylistic collision. So those are probably the top for me. For the featherweight division, my top would be Zabit Magomedsharipov versus Giga Chikadze. That's the top for me. Although there's a lot of great fights too. Alexander Volkanovski versus Zabit would be absolutely crazy. Giga Chikadze versus Max Holloway. That's right there as well with Zabit versus Giga in my opinion. And then for the bantamweight division, I would love to see Jose Aldo versus TJ Dillashaw. That's the fight. And for flyweight, I still do like Figueiredo versus Moreno stylistically. Women's bantamweight, it's honestly only Jermaine Durandamy versus Amanda Nunes. Like the rest of the fights don't intrigue me too much stylistically. It might be more because of the skill gap between so many of those fighters. Women's flyweight, it's kind of the same kind of thing. The main one, honestly, that's the only stylistically anticipated fight would be Tatiana Suarez versus Valentina Shevchenko, because it's the only time someone could challenge Shevchenko and beat her in a given area of fighting. That is the wrestling. Shevchenko is not beating Tatiana Suarez when it comes to wrestling. So it might be a fight that we're going to potentially see Shevchenko have to fight off her back for a majority of the fight, at least theoretically. And then for the strawweight division, for me, it's Carla Esparza versus Rose Namajunas. It's control versus fluidity. And then with the Princess Lioness, hey Weasel, why don't more high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners incorporate wrestling into their skill set? We saw Ortega nearly become a new champ. Imagine if he could consistently get takedowns, then uses Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to finish the fights. This is one of my biggest pet peeves in MMA. Also, thank you for answering my question. Big fan of your content and keep up the good work. Thank you so much. High-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners who do not train in wrestling, instead they train majority of their time in boxing, is one of my biggest pet peeves in all of MMA. Why doesn't Kron Gracie develop his wrestling? Why doesn't Brian Ortega develop his wrestling? Why didn't Fabrizio Verdum improve his wrestling? Like, these guys have to know that nobody's going to try to take him to the ground. So theoretically, there's like no way they can use their strongest skill set unless they drop the opponent or some kind of mistake happens, like Ortega versus Volkanovski. Volkanovski threw a kick, he got countered, he fell to the ground. That stuff doesn't happen all the time. That's actually more of a rare occurrence than taking down the opponent with a double leg or something. A guy like Brian Ortega would get so much better and get so many better results if he just became like a next level wrestler. It looks like he's putting most of his time into boxing the way so many other Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners have done. I understand getting knockouts can be fun, but man, it's the way to win. Ortega will never be a level of striker the way Max Holloway is, or the way Volkanovski is, or the way Zabit is, or the way Giga Chikadze is. He's never going to be that level of a striker. But what he has superior to all those guys is his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's never going to get these guys to the ground in his world consistently because he doesn't have the wrestling. It's crazy. There are a few guys who have implemented the wrestling, like Gilbert Burns. Look at Gilbert Burns. It looks only like Kamaru Usman could beat that guy. That's how good he is, because he implements wrestling. He's one of the only guys to do it. Jacare Souza did it as well. Brian Ortega got to a title shot, but he's getting beat down so severely by the best guys And honestly, he hasn't been at the top that long. I mean, there are a bunch of the guys in this division that are going to destroy him, I believe, in my opinion. Giga Chikadze might absolutely annihilate him in a fight because he probably can't get him to the ground and he cannot strike with him at all. Zabit potentially can destroy him as well. Max Holloway will do it again. Volkanovski would do it again. I'm going to call it right here. If Brian Ortega does not change his wrestling game, he's going to lose more of the high-level fights than he's going to be winning. And that includes fights against other contenders. Great question, though. And then we go to Pacho Mex. What caused these fighters to fall off so hard? So for the majority of these fighters, it is the damage that was dealt to them. Chris Weidman, it was the damage. He had no chin anymore. He would make some mistakes in fights. Like, he would do very well in those consecutive losses that he had. One split bad move, and he just got knocked out or hurt or taken to the ground, got put into a very disadvantaged position in the fight. And the amount of times that happened to him, the damage added on to itself. So now it's like whenever the guy even gets hit, he gets rocked. For Tony Ferguson, I would have to say it was the Justin Gaethje beatdown. That was like the majority of it, but you cannot overlook the injuries this guy had. Cutting weight twice before that Justin Gaethje fight had to have done something to his body, because we have to know that Tony Ferguson cut a lot of weight for 155. He did it twice in such a short amount of time. And now from that beatdown, he has never been the same. He also is getting a bit older. That is also a factor that needs to be contributed. Walt Harris, it's more that he hasn't really changed as a fighter and he makes bad decisions in fights, I guess. Throwing front kicks at Alistair Overeem when he has him hurt and stuff. Being too aggressive at times. Just really being a dangerous boxer, I guess. A southpaw boxer with fast hands for the heavyweight division and a big guy as well. One punch knockout power. That's really all he had. Not many great kicks. Non-existent wrestling. And one of the worst cardio of the whole heavyweight division. With Carolina, one factor is her getting knocked out by Jessica Andrade. But it might be a mental part here. When she reached the top of the division to fight Joanna and ultimately lost that fight, if you do notice, her style changed a bit. She wasn't as unorthodox as she used to be, and she didn't seem like as motivated. This is just hypothetical, but I do believe that the loss to Joanna potentially crushed her spirit in a way. Marlon Moraes, it was the beatdown to Henry Cejudo. That was a contributing factor to his downfall. His chin has never been the same since, and he doesn't deal well with pressure ever since that. Cowboy Cerrone is the damage. Like, the guy's been fighting for so long, he's taking so much damage. It's like the usual decline for older fighters. With James Vick, I would have to say it's a combination of no chin and heavy weight cuts. The guy was way too big for 155. I don't know why he kept trying to make it, and ultimately it probably hurt his chin forever. The amount of times he cut to that weight had to have done a number on his body and onto his brain. And for Jimmy Manuwa, it's being old in the game, taking a lot of damage, and his style was not healthy. He would just go to war with everybody he fought and did not care. He'd always go for the knockout or go for himself getting knocked out. And then I'm going to go to your last question. What about Nate Diaz versus Tony Ferguson at welterweight? I know Ferguson looked bad in his last two fights, but those were contested mostly on the ground, and we know Nate is not shooting takedowns. That is true, but you do have to look at when he fought Beneil Dariush. When Beneil Dariush was throwing strikes at him, he was like running away from it. I never really seen Tony constantly react that way in one fight, where he's like turning his back away from punches and running away and not engaging back, not countering back, not putting any kind of pressure on his opponent. A Tony that's not pressuring his opponent is not the same Tony Ferguson. And that's ultimately what makes me think that he might run away from some of Nate's combinations. If Nate is pressuring Tony Ferguson, keeps him on the cage, and just starts wailing to the body and to the head, that fight is going to be over pretty quickly, man. What we hope for is Tony Ferguson not cutting that much weight to make the welterweight limit would change him a bit and bring back some of the older tenacity that he used to have. And we do have to remember, Tony Ferguson at welterweight has legit knockout power. Then we go to La Cucaracha. With the upcoming fight between Glover and Jan, who do you think would win, and how would Costa match up with the champion and the rest of the top 10? Love the vids, bro, and your knowledge of MMA is stupendous. Oh, thank you so much, man. I'm not going to say anything about the Jan Blachowicz and Glover fight because I'm going to cover that in my prediction video later today. But when we look at Paulo Costa, I think he could do some things against Jan Blachowicz. I think he's fast enough and powerful enough to present some kind of issue in case Jan Blachowicz wants to engage him. But Jan Blachowicz hits harder. He has the wrestling advantage. I don't think Paulo Costa is going to be able to keep up with Jan for the majority of that fight. And he's so reckless on his offense. I don't think he's going to catch Jan unless Jan makes a terrible mistake like rushing forward or something. And then for the rest of the top 10, I think he beats Johnny Walker. I think he beats Nikita Krylov, but that's a good fight. I think he decisions Volkan Oezdemir. That would be a back and forth, probably a split decision or something. He loses to Magomed Ankalaev. He gets sniped down by Dominic Reyes. He gets overpowered and outsped by Thiago Santos. He loses to Anthony Smith. He loses to Alexander Rakic. Definitely loses to Yuri Prochazka. That would be a war, though. And he beats Glover Teixeira. And then we get to Tom Phelan. Hey, Weasel, do straight punches beat looping punches? I've always wondered. Almost every time when they're meeting each other and the accuracy is on point, yes, that's just the way it goes, man. Now, this general rule isn't always going to happen because there are exceptions. Exceptions to the rule of straight punches beat looping punches would be something like if the opponent moves his head off center line, gets on the outside of the straight punch, and then lands an overhand or something, or like a hook or something, then the looping punch is going to be the straight punch. But it ultimately just comes down to like the accuracy. That's it. If you could just land your punch and they're meeting each other at the same time, then the straight punch is going to beat the looping, as we've seen so many examples. I mean, dozens upon dozens of examples of this happening. And then we go to Alfredo Santoskoy. If GSP had continued fighting at welterweight after the Hendricks fight, how many title defenses would he have gotten, if any? Also, who are the fighters that you think could potentially dethrone Kamaru Usman and Israel Adesanya in the future in the respective divisions? The hard-hitting questions here, man. I think GSP loses his very next fight because it would have been against Hendricks again. Hendricks should have won the first fight, and I think he would have definitely won the second. There's not as many adjustments that GSP could have made, in my opinion, compared to what Hendricks could have done. Because you have to remember that Hendricks was relatively young compared to GSP in terms of fight years. He has so much more to learn. And the fighters that could dethrone Kamaru Usman and Israel Adesanya, so that kind of ties hand in hand with what I said in my Nightmare Matchups video. So Colby Covington, potentially, as of what we know right now, is the most competitive fight for Usman. But I do think Usman might beat him easier than he did last time because of the way he's been boxing these days. And he's more confident in his power than he was before. He's also been training with Trevor Whitman a lot more. Gilbert Burns, I believe, as of what we know, is the most dangerous fight for Usman. He's the guy that can finish Usman far more than anybody else right now. But honestly, if he's able to beat those two guys again, because he did beat them before, I think it's the younger guys coming up. I think Usman is so dominant right now. He hits that like almost like John Jones, GSP, Anderson Silva, Jose Aldo status where the only guys that can contest with him are the younger up-and-coming contenders. The Khamzat Chimaevs of the world, possibly. The Shavkat Rakhmanovs. I picked Shavkat Rakhmonov as the nightmare matchup for Kamaru Usman, mainly because of his style and how big and powerful he is. But he's a very young prospect, and we still have to see him compete up against the best guys. But when we look at someone like Shavkat Rakhmonov, a guy who can outstrike Usman potentially. He's a better technical striker than Usman is. He has legit knockout power. He's faster than Usman. He's just as long as he is. He's taller than him. So he has the physical attributes to absolutely give Usman some sort of an issue in that area. But he's also a magnificent wrestler. He's a Sambo practitioner. He has great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, amazing chokes and stuff. I mean, when you think about it, he covers so many of the areas and even hypothetically on paper surpasses Usman in so many areas of the fight game. We just have to see how bright his future is. And that goes for Khamzat Chimaev as well. Khamzat Chimaev, at least in his training videos, has shown his progression as a striker. Now for Israel Adesanya, he might be in the same boat, but the thing about the middleweight division is there's just like no wrestlers. Robert Whittaker and Derek Brunson are the best wrestlers in this division, and I don't know if they can take him to the ground. Let's just get out of the way. Technically, nobody could strike with Adesanya besides if Alex Pereira can do something. If Alex Pereira actually shows up to be something special and not old yet for MMA, he's like the only guy I believe that can technically outstrike Israel Adesanya. But the thing is, the middleweight division is so perfect for someone like Adesanya to rule. So in that one, man, it's very difficult. I don't know. I don't think anybody's going to beat Adesanya. I honestly don't think a lot of guys have that good of a chance. And then we go to SSK9. Can you talk about Dominic Reyes' talk about him protecting his head along with the death in BKFC and overall head injuries in MMA? I am glad in MMA at least that fighters are a lot smarter about their health. Dominic Reyes taking time off to protect himself is something that the older fighters would have never have done. I mean, back in the day, those cavemen thought that getting hit in the head actually makes their chin harder. I'm not even kidding you. They actually thought getting hit to the head makes it better for them, when it was the exact opposite. They were getting CTE because of the way they were sparring. Kelvin Gastelum took a year off of the big beatdown against Max Holloway, where guys in the past would never have done that. They would have wanted to fight the next month. I mean, look what happened when Michael Venom Page flying kneed Cyborg Santos. The guy wanted to fight like 3 months later, and his skull was cracked because he's an old school fighter. That's the way they always were. The whole incident with the BKFC thing was, I believe that guy was older. I believe he's gotten knocked out in his career multiple times. And that was the issue, man. It's these younger guys who are understanding their health a lot more. And there needs to be, honestly, more research, because you can't just leave it to the fighter to come up with the theories themselves, you know? We need more scientific research about head injuries, brain damage, and all that stuff. And it's sad to say, the fighters of like a few generations ago, or even last generation, are probably the only fighters that are going to be studied on for CTE. It's that new, man. And that's the scariest thing. The new fighters of today are creating precaution, but they don't necessarily know exactly what they need to do besides just like take time off and stuff. It's like, what kind of equipment are going to be better for their head in terms of sparring? How much sparring is enough? Is there eventually going to be a day where they can monitor the amount of brain damage that each fighter has while they're alive and active as a fighter, instead of when they pass away, which seems like the main way they can actually know how much brain damage they actually have. Scientifically, we're just too far behind, in my opinion, to fully understand head injuries and how to gauge for it. I'm glad the new fighters are understanding how important their health is for the sport. So all credit to Dominic Reyes, man. He's a very smart guy. And then we go to Fish Gato. Hey Weasel, what do you think the golden era of each division was? As in, when was it the most exciting with contenders, possible matchups, and how fun champions were? Oh man, all the divisions were in different times. The heavyweight division's golden era was like between 2009 to 2015-ish. It was like when Brock Lesnar and those guys started to be weeded out, and Cain Velasquez, Junior Santos, Alistair Overeem, Fabricio Verdum, Stipe Miocic, Daniel Cormier, Josh Barnett was still in the game. Like when these guys were at the top, that's when I believe the heavyweight division was the best that it's ever been. Light heavyweight was definitely the Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Shogun Rua, Vanderlei Silva, like that era. Light heavyweight has never touched that era ever again. Back in that day, when Chuck Liddell was fighting, when Shogun Rua was fighting, when Lyoto Machida was coming up, and Rashad Evans, like that division was the best weight class of the entire MMA world. Crazy how much of a 180 it made so suddenly. For the middleweight division, I mean, middleweight's never had like a fantastic era. It's always been either a mid-tier division or a lower-tier division, always. Even when Anderson Silva ruled it. So I'd probably say the golden era of the middleweight division was like, I would probably say from 2018 to 2020 was the golden era of the middleweight division, when you have Romero in there, you got Jacare, Robert Whittaker, Kelvin Gastelum, Adesanya was on his way up, Derek Brunson was in there. That seemed to be the best middleweight division ever. For welterweight, this is more up to preference. You can either go the recent era, like 2018 to now, where you have Kamaru Usman, Colby Covington, Jorge Masvidal, Gilbert Burns, Tyron Woodley, Wonderboy Thompson, Leon Edwards. That could be considered the golden era of the welterweight division. Or some people really like when Matt Hughes was champ and BJ Penn was in there, GSP was in there, Frank Trigg, Sean Scher, Carlos Newton. A lot of people like that era as well. But in my opinion, I think today's era of the welterweight division is the best. Lightweight, it's today, bar none, not even close. It's one of the greatest divisions in UFC history. For featherweight, I would say it's today, but from 2012 to 2015, that was a strong era for featherweight. It definitely was not far off. For bantamweight, it's today as well, easily. For flyweight, it was like from 2013 to 2017-ish. When you had Demetrius Johnson, Joseph Benavidez, John Dodson, Ali Bagotina, Kyoji Horiguchi, Henry Cejudo, just a lot of great fighters in the flyweight division. And then for women's bantamweight, I would say around 2016 was the best era of the women's bantamweight division. This was like toward the end of Ronda Rousey's run. Holly Holm was at the top, Misha Tate was there, Valentina Shevchenko, Amanda Nunes, Raquel Pennington was there, Jermaine Durandamy. That was definitely the best era of the women's bantamweight division. Flyweight and strawweight are too new to accurately pick. And that is the end of the podcast, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. And if you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. If you enjoyed my content, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And great questions this week. I can't wait for the next one.